Hello. Today I'll be talking about the ethical deployment of AI triage in rural low middle income countries' primary care. So let's start with this thesis and why this matters right now. My thesis today is that AI triage cannot be ethically deployed without human rights governance and meaningful community participation. AI triage tools are increasingly being pushed into health systems around the world, often framed as solutions for clinician shortages and gap in access. The potential for success is so real and quite exciting, but the context determines the actual impact. In rural, low, middle income countries, the realities on the ground shape whether AI actually becomes helpful or instead becomes harmful to the community. Without strong governance and meaningful participation, these systems risk reinforcing the very inequities they claim to address. To understand why this happens, we need to start with the core problem. So here is where the real tension starts. AI is moving incredibly fast, much faster than many low middle income countries' healthcare systems can realistically keep up with. Most of these tools arrive as these fully built products designed in completely different environments with assumptions baked in that don't match these rural, low middle income country realities. And when a healthcare system doesn't have a strong governance or the capacity to evaluate or regulate AI, technology ends up functioning like this black box people are expected to trust. Another layer here is that AI itself isn't static. So these tools need continuous updates, pertaining and monitoring as they're used in real world settings. Many low and middle income countries simply just don't have the long-term technical capacity to maintain them. So now you have this tool that evolves over time, but a system can't evolve with it. And that's where these safety issues really start to creep in. The mix match between how AI is built and where it is employed is where the ethical risks really start to multiply. It's not that technology is bad, it's that the context it's entering hasn't exactly been considered. So this is your core problem. The pace of innovation is outpacing the capabilities of ethical, contextual, and regulatory readiness. So this is where power really comes into the picture. AI isn't being built in a vacuum. It's being built by a small group of wealthy countries and corporations who hold most of the technical expertise, the data, and then also the decision-making power. That means these low middle income countries have very little influence of the design choices, the training data, or even the standards that shape these tools. They're essentially receiving technologies that were built for completely different contexts, different people, different environments. When AI is exported into rural clinics, it often carries Western assumptions about the workflows, the communication styles, what good care looks like, that don't always translate to these contexts. This dynamic creates dependency. Low middle income countries end up relying on external actors, not just for the tool, but for updates, maintenance, and even interpretation. So the power imbalance isn't just technical, it's structural. And it limits low middle income country autonomy and is shaping technologies that directly impact their healthcare systems. Data sovereignty is one of the most overlooked issues in AI deployment, especially in low and middle income country context. A lot of the time, the data that powers these tools and the data they generate is stored and processed by companies in the global north. That means these low middle income country governments and communities have very limited control over how their data is collected, used, or shared. And in places where regulatory environment is still developing, that creates real risks of exploitation or surveillance. Another layer here is that many low middle income countries, governments, clinics, and communities aren't fully aware of the risks associated with AI systems. Things like data extraction, opaque algorithms, or long-term governance issues, and that lack of awareness really increases the vulnerability. This isn't a technical issue, it's a power issue. And when the data leaves the country, so does the ability to govern the AI systems built on top of it. Without data sovereignty, low middle income countries can't meaningfully regulate or oversee AI. They're essentially dependent on external actors for both technology and the information that drives it. To understand why AI deployment is so delicate, we have to look back at the historical and cultural context of Western medicine in these low and middle income countries. Medical systems were often introduced through colonial or missionary structures. That history still shapes how people experience healthcare today. There's a long pattern of outside interventions, ignoring local knowledges, traditions, and values, as well as extractive research practices that have left real ethical wounds. At the same time, religious, cultural, and community-based healing systems remain central in many of these regions. These aren't fringe alternatives, they are trusted, relational, and embedded in daily life. Accessibility isn't just about distance, it's about poverty and gender norms and social hierarchy, all of which influence how people engage with new health technology. So AI isn't arriving in a neutral space. It's arriving into a context where trust has to be earned and not assumed. Historical mistrust of Western medical systems plays a major role in how communities interpret AI when it enters their health spaces. It's not evaluated as a natural tool or neutral tool. It's filtered through lived memories of exploitation, top-down interventions, and research practices that did not respect the local autonomy. Communities may approach AI with caution, skepticism, or resistance, not because they reject innovation, but because past harms has taught them to be careful with these outside technologies. These reactions are rational responses to a long history of unequal power, extractive data practices, and medical systems that did not always act in their best interest. Trust in this context has to be intentionally built through participation, transparency, and accountability, which is the very elements that have often been missing in previous interventions. And when we layer that historic mistrust into lived realities of rural clinics today, the challenges of deploying AI become way more visible. So when we talk about AI deployment, it's easy to imagine the kind of clinical environments these tools were designed for. The stable electricity, the reliable internet, the consistent staffing, standardized workflows. These rural clinics in many middle-income countries operate very differently. Their staff are stretched thin, patient flows are high, and resources can be inconsistent from day to day. Also, infrastructure challenges are real. Electricity may cut out, connectivity can be weak, equipment is often outdated or shared across multiple departments. Healthcare workers are also struggling with many different roles. They could be the clinician, the administrator, counselor, data clerk, and all of these are often with limited training or support. Documentation itself is consistent, not because people don't care, but because these systems don't allow for the kind of standardized, time-intensive data entry that AI often can assume or require to be correct. So when AI systems built for well-resourced environments are dropped into these settings, they struggle, not because the technology is bad, but because the context itself is just fundamentally different. Most AI tools are built with certain assumptions baked in: your stable electricity, your reliable internet, consistent workflows, and clean standardized data, as I've been talking about. Rural clinics, as I've been saying, don't operate under these conditions. The connectivity drops, the hardware is shared or outdated, and workflow shifts constantly based off of staffing and patient load. Documentation is inconsistent because systems don't support the kind of structured data that AI tools expect. Because these systems are trained primarily in the global north, they often are misinterpreted with their local languages, local cultural expressions, and cultural expressions of illness itself. So instead of reducing inequities, AI can actually amplify them if it isn't adapted to the realities that the environment is entering. Digital divides as ethical barriers. Connectivity gaps means some clinics can't run AI tools consistently, can't download the updates that keeps the system safe. Hardware is another barrier. Many clinics share devices, rely on outdated equipment, or don't have the infrastructure that AI tools assume. Digital literacy also varies. Some health workers are comfortable with digital tools, while others have very little exposure, and that affects how AI is used, interpreted, or trusted. These divides aren't neutral. They reinforce existing power imbalances by giving better resource facilities more access to AI benefits. So instead of reducing inequities, AI can deepen them if digital divides aren't addressed as ethical barriers. Bias is amplified in low middle income countries. So these AI tools, they may work, but they often don't work well in low middle income countries because the models weren't trained on the right data. Most AI systems were built in data sets from the global north, which means they reflect the symptoms, the languages, the cultural expressions of illness from these regions. But illness doesn't present the same way everywhere. Environmental factors, nutrition, comorbidities, and cultural communication patterns all shape how symptoms appear and how people describe them. So when a model is trained on the global north data and it is used in a global south rural clinic, it can be misinterpreted or underdetect conditions that are common in that region. These aren't just technical errors, they are ethical issues. Bias in training data purposes reproduce inequities in diagnosis and treatment. Without local data, local validation, and local adaptation, outputs can be inaccurate or even harmful. One of the biggest ethical barriers is that AI systems are rarely designed with meaningful participation from the people who actually use them. Clinicians, community health workers, patients in low middle income countries often have little to no voice in shaping the tools that enter their health systems. That means the local knowledge, the cultural practices, the communication norms, and the workflows realities isn't built into the design. Decision-making power stays concentrated in the global north, which reinforces the same power balances that we've been talking about this whole time. So communities end up as recipients of technology rather than the co-creators, and that's when people aren't a part of the design process. The tools don't fit their needs, their workflows, their values. They can't properly help them. Participation isn't a nice to have, it's an ethical requirement. Without it, AI systems will continue to misalign with realities of the environments they're meant to be in, or that they're meant to support. Accountability gaps: who controls low middle income country data? One of the biggest ethical challenges is that accountability is fragmented. AI tools are often deployed, owned, and updated by companies outside of the country itself. The lower middle income country governments frequently don't have the leverage or regulatory power to demand the transparency about how these systems work, how they're updated, or how errors are handled. So when something goes wrong, a misdiagnosis, a harmful recommendation, or a system failure, it's not clear who's responsible. Is it the developer, the vendor, the ministry, the clinician? Who's to say? Clinicians often end up carrying the blame, even when their decisions were shaped by an opaque algorithm they had no control over. Without clear accountability structures, harms go unaddressed. And when harms go unaddressed, trust erodes, not just in AI, but the system, the health system itself. So given everything that we've discussed, the historical context, the structural inequities, the lack of participation, and the accountability gaps, we now need a governance framework that centers people, not just technology. The human rights framework do exactly that. They prioritize dignity, autonomy, and equity, which are essential in a health context. A rights-based approach shifts AI governance away from the narrow technical compliance and towards ethical obligation. It requires transparency, participation, and accountability, very things that are often missing in current AI deployment. It also protects communities from exploitation, surveillance, and data extraction, which we've seen are real, and there are risks when power is concentrated outside the country. Ultimately, human rights frameworks ensure that AI strengthens health equity rather than undermining it. They give us a principled foundation for deciding not just how AI should be deployed, but whether it should be deployed at all. So with all of that, let me ground this in a concrete example. Imagine you're in a rural primary care clinic staffed by 1 or 2 health workers who are responsible for hundreds of patients across a wide geographic area. Electricity cuts out unpredictably. Connectivity is weak, devices are shared or outdated, workflows shift constantly depending on who shows up that day. Documentation varies because staff are juggling these multiple roles, that clinician, the administrator, the counselor, often with no support. Now, imagine an AI tool introduced to this environment. It was trained in the global north, so it misinterprets symptoms that are common in this region. When the tool gives a harmful recommendation, it's not clear who's responsible. As we're wondering, the vendors, the ministry, the clinician who trusted the system. It's not about a broken algorithm. It's a story about governance, about how and what happens when these tools are deployed without participation, without context, and without accountability. So what does AI deployment ethically actually look like in practice? It starts with participation. Communities, clinicians, local researchers need to be involved from the very beginning, not just the rollout point. So second, AI systems must be built and validated with the local data. Without conceptual or contextual relevance, the tools will continue to misinterpret symptoms, workflows, and cultural expressions of illness. Transparency itself is also essential. Ministries and clinicians need to know how the model works, what data it's trained on, and where its limitations are. We also need clear accountability structures. When errors occur, responsibility should not fall on the clinician alone. It should be shared across these developers, these vendors, and the governing bodies that allow them to be a part of it. Finally, equity has to be the guiding principle. AI should only be deployed where the infrastructure, training, and governance structures can support safe and reliable use. Otherwise, it's risk deepening the very inequities it claims to solve. Common counterargument. AI has this enormous potential to close these gaps in low middle income country health systems for faster diagnosis, decision support, and efficiency gains. True, I think that's true in theory, but most of these benefits rely on assumptions that don't hold in many rural or underserved settings. Your stable infrastructure, reliable data, and strong governance that I've been talking about. Without local participation and contextual adaptation, AI doesn't close gaps, it actually continues to widen them. It reinforces the inequities already built into the global health systems. So the question isn't whether AI has potential, it's whether the AI or the conditions for AI are ethical, equitable, and if equitable deployments are in place. And right now, those conditions requiring strengthening systems first, not by bypassing with technology. In conclusion, to close, AI absolutely has potential to support healthcare systems in low middle income countries, but that cannot be separated from the structural realities that we've discussed. The challenges weren't result of just technical glitches. They're a result of power imbalances, lack of participation, and systems that weren't built with local context in mind. Ethical deployments require more than improving the algorithm. It requires shifting in who gets to design, who gets to decide, and who gets to benefit from the technology. Human rights framework give us a principled foundation for that shift. It centers dignity, autonomy, and equity. Ultimately, if we don't address the structural conditions around AI, the technology risks reinforcing the very inequities it's claiming to solve. But with participation, rights-based governance, AI can support, rather than undermine, health equity. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time, and thank you for listening. I'm sorry, thank you. Here are my references. I hope you learned something today, or at least listen to something interesting about ethical AI deployment in rural, low, middle income countries. I will be leaving the camera now so you can look at my references longer.